Welcome, everyone. Um, Let me just say how thrilled I am that you are joining us today for this custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah, it's really great to be here and dig into this one.
If you've been listening to us for a while, you know we love taking a complex situation, gathering up the raw source material, and, well, really getting under the hood.
Hmm.
We want to see how the mechanics of a standoff actually work in practice. And today, we have an absolutely fascinating dynamic to explore.
We really do.
It's a situation that feels almost like something out of a political thriller, but it is entirely real.
And unfolding right now.
Right. It captures a dilemma that is practically universal in modern democracies. So I want you to picture a compelling scenario for a moment.
Okay.
Imagine a political party. They've been through the ringer,
Yeah.
weathered endless controversies, but right now, today, they are experiencing a massive, undeniable resurgence.
Yeah, a real comeback.
Exactly. They are climbing the polls, the grassroots momentum is just palpable, and they are gearing up for major local elections.
Poised to become a significant power broker.
Yes, but, and this is the huge hit, but just as they are about to burst through to the next level of influence, they hit a massive, seemingly impenetrable brick wall.
A wall that completely paralyzes their ability to actually govern,
Right.
regardless of how many votes they pull in.
And here is the kicker. It's a wall built entirely on the dark, distant pasts of a handful of their candidates.
Hmm.
Every other major political player is looking at them and saying, we refuse to work with you. Not because of the legislation they want to pass tomorrow.
No, it's because of what a few of their people said in private chats or groups 10 or 15 years ago.
Right. It is a complete, absolute political standoff. And that brings us to the incredible source material for today's deep dive.
It's a dense one today.
It is. We are looking at a highly charged, incredibly extensive transcript from a YouTube video broadcast by News van de Dag.
Which translates to News of the Day.
Exactly. This is a deep interview featuring Lidewij de Vos, a prominent representative and the spokesperson for the Dutch political party Forum for Democratie.
Often just referred to as FED.
FED, yeah. She is sitting down in a studio with a panel of 4 interviewers, Renske, Bram, Thomas, and Victor.
And they are subjecting her to an intense, relentless grilling.
Oh, absolutely relentless.
This is a phenomenal piece of source material. For anyone interested in the raw mechanics of political communication and crisis management, this text is a goldmine.
Totally agree.
But let me establish right off the bat what our mission is for this deep dive. Our goal here today is to impartially unpack the anatomy of this political standoff.
Right, we need to be clear about that.
We're not here to take sides in the Dutch political debate. Whether you lean left, right, or center, that's completely beside the point for our analysis today.
Absolutely.
What we're going to do is analyze the fascinating communication strategies on display, the intense media dynamics at play, and, well, the fundamental clash of core principles happening right there in that studio. We have a politician aggressively defending her party's resurgence against a panel of journalists and commentators who are fundamentally questioning the moral foundation of her candidate list.
It's a collision of 2 entirely different ways of viewing political reality.
And the stakes could not be higher.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the sheer tension crackling in this room, we have to understand the scale of the comeback that Forum voor Democratie is attempting here.
We do.
The text paints a very clear picture of FED's current status, and the interviewers themselves note right at the beginning that the party seems to be entering a second life.
Yeah, that's the exact phrase they use.
They aren't just surviving a rough patch, They are expanding aggressively. The text mentions they are participating in a record-breaking 104 municipalities for the upcoming local elections.
That is massive for a party that many thought was on the ropes.
It is. And national polling, they are looking solid at somewhere between 10 to 14 seats.
Right, and we need to clarify for you listening, in a highly fragmented parliamentary system like the Netherlands, pulling in 10 to 14 seats is not a minor footnote.
Not at all.
That is a massive chunk of political real estate.
It alters the entire arithmetic of the parliament.
Exactly. Contextualizing what this means for the broader political landscape is crucial for understanding why this interview is so incredibly tense. This is not a fringe movement that is just quietly fading away into obscurity where mainstream politicians can comfortably ignore them. This is a growing, energized bloc.
Right. They're becoming mathematically impossible to ignore.
When a party is polling at that level and running in over 100 municipalities, they are a force that traditional parties eventually have to reckon with. They become a factor in coalition building.
Which makes the central conflict of this interview, the absolute refusal of other parties to work with them, so vital to dissect.
Precisely. If they were a tiny splinter group with zero influence, the major parties wouldn't need a strategy to deal with them.
They just ignore them.
Yeah, but because they are growing, this exclusion strategy, this brick wall you mentioned earlier, it becomes a massive friction point in the democratic process itself.
So how does Lidewij de Vos handle that pressure in the room? Because when the panel asks her if she gets tired of the constant negative media reports, she seems to just brush it off completely.
She practically rolls her eyes at it.
Right. The text shows her essentially saying, it's the usual tune. When things go well for FVD, the counter-reaction comes. She treats the outrage as a mere symptom of their success.
It's a very calculated posture.
Her core thesis for why the party is growing is entirely focused on the present and the future. She insists that they are surging because they are addressing the real issues that everyday citizens actually care about.
Yeah, she is desperately trying to bypass the scandal and pivot straight to policy.
And she's very disciplined about it.
She is executing a very deliberate pivot. And the specific policies she highlights to the panel are revealing about the party's platform and their target demographic. She isn't talking about abstract political theory. She is aiming directly at the immediate anxieties of the electorate.
Let's look at the specific example she brings up from the transcript, because she builds this fortress of policy issues very carefully.
It really is a fortress.
First, she mentions the creation of 38,000 new asylum shelter spots, or AZCs, as they are known there.
Right.
She argues to the panel that planting these centers in local communities has very real, tangible consequences for the people living there, and that citizens are rightfully worried about the impact on their neighborhoods.
It's a highly localized, visceral issue.
Exactly. Then she immediately pivots to economic anxieties. She brings up the implementation of zero-emission zones.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah, her argument here is that these environmental regulations aren't just, saving the planet. They are going to actively bankrupt local entrepreneurs, delivery drivers, and small business owners who can't afford to upgrade their vehicles overnight.
She is tapping into a very potent vein of populist appeal here. She is positioning her party as the sole defender of the hardworking local business against sweeping, top-down government mandates.
Mandates that look great on paper but devastate local economies.
Exactly.
But she doesn't stop there. She throws in general tax increases, which is a universal grievance, especially during times of economic strain.
Everybody hates taxes.
Right. And finally, she highlights a very unique stance that sets FVD apart from almost everyone else in the room. They are advocating for an exit.
Meaning the Netherlands leaving the European Union entirely.
Yes. She emphasizes that they are currently the only party pushing for this level of national sovereignty.
It's a bold differentiator.
It is. So she constructs this barrier of heavy-hitting issues, immigration impact, crippling environmental regulation costs, rising taxes, and national independence.
What's fascinating here is the sophisticated rhetorical strategy De Vos is employing right out of the gate. Well, she is attempting to create a very sharp, almost blinding contrast for the listener and for the voters watching. On one side, you have these highly tangible, immediate citizen concerns.
Like the idea of a new asylum center opening up right in your backyard.
Right, or a tradesman losing his livelihood because his work van isn't zero emission. These are visceral kitchen table issues that cause people real stress.
Yeah.
On the other side, she frames the panel's concerns about past behavior as an abstract, manufactured media obsession.
Ah, I see.
She is implicitly asking the public, what actually matters more to your daily life? My policy on your taxes, or a private chat message someone sent a decade ago?
It's a classic deflection technique, but it's executed with a tremendous amount of discipline.
It really is. She wants to force the debate onto her preferred terrain, where she holds the populace high ground.
But the panel refuses to play on her terrain.
They're having absolutely none of it.
No, they won't let her stay comfortably in that policy fortress. And this brings us to the massive roadblock, the elephant in the room that the panel is determined to dismantle.
The brick wall.
Right. In European politics, there's this concept of a cordon sanitaire, a sanitary cordon.
This is a very common practice over there.
It's an agreement among mainstream political parties to officially exclude a radical or controversial party from any coalition, government, or cooperative agreement.
It's essentially a political quarantine.
And the interviewers point out that major cities and numerous other politicians have explicitly stated, whatever happens, we won't work with FVD. The brick wall is officially codified.
And to understand why that brick wall is there and why the panel is pressing her so hard, we have to break down the specific allegations that Renske, Bram, Thomas, and Victor are bringing to the table.
Because they aren't just vague accusations.
No, they're making it clear that this quarantine isn't about simple disagreements over tax rates or zoning laws. The concerns stem from two highly toxic areas.
Okay, let's lay them out.
First, they confront her with private chat messages dating back 10 to 16 years. According to the panel, these aren't just off-color jokes.
Right.
These messages contain radical, extreme, and specifically anti-Semitic content.
That's a heavy accusation.
It is. Second, they bring up past memberships or active involvements with extreme right-wing organizations by people currently on the FED candidate lists.
And the text gets incredibly specific here, which makes the confrontation so tense.
They name names.
Yes, the panel doesn't just wave their hands and say bad groups. They name the organizations on the record. They mention the MVU, the Dutch People's Union. They mention the Juizebond, and an organization called Voorpost. And they don't assume the audience knows what these are, they define them.
They make sure the viewer knows exactly what they're talking about.
They describe these organizations to De Vos as clubs that actively advocate for a nearly entirely white Europe.
That is the exact phrase used in the interview.
Nearly entirely white Europe. That is a devastating accusation to throw at a modern political party.
It is. They aren't just labeling FED candidates as conservative. They are branding their pasts as fundamentally racially extreme.
Which is why the tension is so high.
That phrasing explains the crux of the panel's interrogation strategy. They're looking at Lidewij de Vos and essentially asking a structural, existential question about her entire political apparatus.
Right. How does a party this big end up with these candidates?
Exactly. How can a mainstream political party, a party polling at 10 to 14 seats, running in over 100 municipalities, harbor individuals with documented ties to these specific extreme ideologies?
It's the question she has to answer.
And perhaps more importantly, the deeper psychological question they are pressing her on is this. Why do these specific individuals feel so at home at FVD compared to all the other political parties in the Netherlands?
That's the real trap.
What is the unseen signal that FVD is broadcasting that attracts people with this highly specific radical background?
That is the narrative trap De Vos has to navigate. The panel is implying that the presence of these candidates isn't an accident. It's a symptom of the party's true nature.
Exactly.
To really ground this debate, to take it out of the abstract realm of some candidates and make it concrete for you listening, the interview zeroes in on a very specific case study.
They bring up a real person.
They bring up a candidate named Frank Volkerts. The text notes he is the #2 candidate on the FED list in the municipality of Nieuwegein.
So we aren't talking about a low-level volunteer handing out flyers.
No, this is someone high up on a local list, someone positioned to hold actual office.
It's the perfect focal point for the interviewers.
Yeah.
It takes the general concept of questionable pasts and attaches a real name, a high rank, and a specific timeline to it.
It forces De Vos to defend a tangible human being rather than an abstract concept. The panel's accusation, laid out specifically by one of the interviewers, Victor, is incredibly direct. He claims that this candidate, Frank Volkerts, was a member of the MVU again, that extreme right-wing group advocating for a white Europe for at least 7 years.
And when you hear that, 7 years is a massive chunk of time.
It is.
It implies a deep, sustained, adult ideological commitment. It's not a weekend retreat you wandered into by mistake.
Right.
It's a significant era of someone's life. The panel throws this 7-year timeline down like a gauntlet.
And this is where De Vos's defense mechanism is incredibly revealing about how political narratives are constructed and contested.
She doesn't just fold.
Not at all. She doesn't just apologize or deflect. She completely rejects their premise and offers a passionately detailed counter-narrative.
It's a masterclass in political reframing and timeline manipulation.
She calls the panel's 7-year claim colder, which translates roughly to nonsense or total rubbish. And then she lays out her meticulously constructed version of Frank Volkerts' history.
And her narrative is wild.
It really is. According to De Vos in the text, Volkerts actually came from a violent, extreme left environment initially.
He was on the far left.
Right. He had a major ideological falling out, completely broke ties with his parents, and in an act of profound, almost blind rebellion, he swung to the complete opposite end of the political spectrum and joined the extreme right MVU.
just to spite them, basically.
But the crucial part of her defense, the absolute linchpin, is that she insists he was only a member of the MVU for exactly 10 months, not 7 years.
Just 10.
Just 10 months. She emphasizes that he ran away hard from that group the moment he realized what it was.
Let's analyze why De Vos fights so aggressively over this specific timeline. The difference between 7 years and 10 months changes the entire psychological complexion of the story for a voter.
How so?
By framing it as a 10-month stint born out of familial trauma and rebellion, she's constructing the classic youth sin narrative.
I see.
A 10-month radical phase, when you are young, angry, and rebelling against your parents, can be sold to the public as a mistake. A temporary lapse in judgment, a phase of finding oneself.
People can relate to making mistakes when they're young and angry?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A 7-year membership, however, is a career. It is deeply ingrained ideology. It cannot be brushed off as a youth sin. Establishing that 10-month boundary is vital for her defense protocol. It makes forgiveness plausible.
And she builds on that plausibility beautifully, turning her defense into an attack.
The pivot.
Yes, the pivot. After those 10 months, according to De Vos, Volkert spent the next 7 years as a member of the VVD.
Now, we should explain the VVD is a mainstream governing party in the Netherlands, the party of the Prime Minister for many years.
Right, a very standard establishment party. And De Vos points out to the panel that during those 7 years in the VVD, no rooster crowed about it, meaning nobody in the media or the political establishment raised a single issue about his past.
He was perfectly acceptable to them.
He was. Then he left them and joined FVD at its inception.
There is the second layer of her rhetorical strategy. She is highlighting alleged hypocrisy to delegitimize the panel's entire line of questioning.
She's saying, look at your own rules.
She is weaponizing Volkert's resume against the media and the political establishment. Her underlying argument is incredibly potent.
What's the core of it?
She's essentially saying, if this man was perfectly acceptable for the mainstream VVD for 7 years, and his 10-month past wasn't a problem for them, why does it suddenly become a national moral crisis the very moment he runs for Forum for Democracy?
That's a hard question for the panel to dodge.
It is. She uses this case study to suggest to the listener that the outrage in the room is entirely manufactured and brutally partisan.
She's telling the panel, this isn't about your moral concerns regarding a candidate's past. This is about your fear of FED's present momentum.
Exactly. You are using opposition research, not for ethics, but for sabotage.
It's a fascinating standoff, and it leads directly into what might be the most intense, grinding part of the whole transcript. Let's talk about the PR impasse.
The impasse is palpable.
There's a specific phrase the panel keeps using over and over again. They keep demanding that De Vos needs to de angel erudet halen, which translates to pulling the sting out of it.
Right. De angel erudet halen.
They are practically begging her to adopt a standard textbook crisis communication strategy.
The dynamic in the room shifts noticeably here. The panel stops acting purely like inquisitors and starts acting almost like frustrated PR consultants.
Yeah, you can hear the frustration.
Their argument to her is incredibly pragmatic, almost pleading. They are looking at the polling data, they're looking at the potential power FED could hold in these municipalities, and they are essentially saying, look, you have a massive political opportunity here, but you are actively choosing to trip over your own feet.
The panel's proposed solution is incredibly simple. They just want De Vos to ask these specific candidates with the controversial past to publicly retract their old statements.
Seems like an easy fix to them.
Just step up to a microphone, face the cameras, and say, I said this a decade ago, I was wrong, I distanced myself from those groups. The panel argues that doing this one simple thing would clear the air. It would literally pull the sting out of the media attacks.
And more importantly, they argue it would finally break that cordon sanitaire.
Exactly. It would allow FED to actually govern, form coalitions, and according to the panel, it would probably attract even more middle-of-the-road voters who are currently hesitant to associate with the brand.
That's the pragmatic view. One of the panelists even identifies himself as a communications expert, and he flat out tells De Vos that her current strategy of just ignoring the demands for public apologies is failing miserably.
He calls it an affiliating, a distraction that will guarantee they remain marginalized forever.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are witnessing a fundamental, irreconcilable clash between traditional political management and populist defiance.
It really is a culture clash in that studio.
De Vos's staunch refusal to play this PR game is deeply rooted in her party's DNA. She outlines a very specific defense protocol that she believes is entirely sufficient, and she refuses to yield an inch further.
Let's break down her protocol.
First, she emphasizes process. She claims to the panel that every single candidate went through a rigorous internal screening and was interrogated on their viewpoints before making the list.
Okay, so they didn't just walk in off the street.
Right. Second, she emphasizes the present. She states unequivocally that all candidates have fully committed to the current FVD party program, which she points out contains absolutely nothing radical, extreme, or discriminatory.
Third, and this is where she tries to shut the conversation down, she points to her own role as the leader and spokesperson.
She stands in front of them.
She tells the panel, I have already stated publicly that FVD has nothing to do with those old organizations. I have said that those individuals no longer hold those views.
She feels that her word, representing the official party apparatus, should be the end of the story. She is acting as the shield for her candidates.
Let's explore the psychological and political standoff happening right there, because it is profound. The panel wants individual public acts of contrition.
They want the candidates to wear the hair shirt, to perform a ritual of submission to the mainstream moral consensus.
But De Vos views this demand entirely differently. When the panel says, pull the sting, De Vos hears, submit to our authority.
Yes. She explicitly uses the word chanterin blackmail.
Blackmail.
She views demanding public apologies for decade-old actions as bowing to a hostile, bad-faith media and political establishment.
From her perspective, this is a slippery slope of submission.
Absolutely. If she forces her candidates to apologize today for a 10-year-old chat message, tomorrow the media will demand an apology for a 5-year-old tweet, and the next day for a controversial joke.
The cycle of submission never ends.
And it makes the party look weak.
Hmm.
She flatly refuses to adapt to parties that she believes are operating purely to destroy her. Parties that she thinks are just using these old controversies as a convenient excuse to avoid debating her on the actual difficult policy issues.
Like the asylum centers or the climate regulations.
Exactly.
It's a high-stakes game of chicken. The panel is saying, apologize, show some humility, and you can join the club and wield actual power.
And De Vos is saying, I won't apologize, I won't submit to your rituals, and eventually we'll be so big you'll have to let us in anyway.
A massive part of that game of chicken revolves around how she perceives the referee of this game, the media itself.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us to the next massive theme in the source text, media framing and boycotts.
Because De Vos doesn't just sit there and take the hits, she goes completely on the offensive against the press.
Turns the spotlight right back on them.
She accuses the media of actively, intentionally creating a hostile atmosphere, a bapalda-sphere around her party. And she throws out a statistic that, from her point of view, proves her case entirely.
It's a striking number.
She says the party has 1,100 candidates running in these municipal elections across the country. Yet, she points out with immense frustration, the media has spent 4 straight weeks obsessing over the pasts of maybe 5 of them.
5 out of 1,100.
Right. She uses that ratio to argue to the panel that the scrutiny is entirely disproportionate, statistically absurd, and clearly driven by a political agenda to derail their momentum.
It's a very powerful statistical framing. She is trying to shrink the controversy down to a microscopic anomaly.
But the text then shifts to something even more tangible regarding the media landscape, a literal talk show boycott.
This is where things get really concrete.
The panel openly discusses the fact that FVD is essentially banned from appearing on the major NPO public broadcasting talk shows.
And NPO is the state-funded public broadcaster.
Yes, and they specifically name Eva Genek's show, which is a massive, culturally significant platform in the Netherlands.
What's truly revealing about this part of the transcript is that even the critical panel, the very people who have just spent half an hour grilling her over extreme right ties, concedes that this boycott is scandalous and unbelievable.
Even they think it goes too far.
One panelist points out the democratic absurdity of it. FED is sitting on 10-plus seats in the national polls, representing a huge swath of the tax-paying electorate.
Right. He argues vehemently that they absolutely deserve a platform, not to be given a free pass, but to be critically questioned in public, exactly like they're doing in this YouTube interview.
The fact that the state-funded broadcaster won't even invite them to defend themselves lends a massive amount of fuel to De Vos's core narrative.
That the establishment is rigging the game against them.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. De Vos doesn't just play defense or complain about being a victim of the media.
No, she goes on the attack.
She uses a very aggressive, highly calculated counterattack strategy.
Yeah.
It's a rhetorical device often called whataboutism, but she wields it specifically to try and expose what she sees as glaring, undeniable double standards in the media and political landscape.
She comes to this interview armed with counterexamples.
Oh, she brought a whole list. Let's look at the 3 specific ones she drops on the panel to turn the heat back on them. First, she brings up the SP, the Socialist Party, a staunchly left-wing group.
She claims an SP member in the Provincial Council of Utrecht once explicitly said, on the record, "Let's shoot Johan Derksen," referring to a famous, often controversial Dutch TV personality.
A literal death threat.
A literal death threat. De Vos points out with outrage that this SP member was allowed to remain in their official position for 3 years after making that statement.
It is a very sharp, deliberate contrast. She's forcing the panel to compare a physical, violent threat made by an active politician currently in office to a bad joke in a private chat made by a citizen 10 years before they ever ran for office.
She is asking the panel, where is your proportional outrage?
Exactly. She demands consistency.
Then she brings up a more recent event to hammer the point home. She mentions an FVD Christmas gala.
Right.
She notes that the media scrutinized the guest list of this gala heavily, desperately looking for controversy. And she points out that an employee of the CDA, a very mainstream establishment Christian Democratic Party, attended that FVD gala.
Okay, so someone from a normal party went to their party.
Right. Yet, she notes to the panel, nobody in the media went to Henri Bontebal, the leader of the CDA, shoved a microphone in his face, and demanded he answer for his employee attending an FED event.
She uses this to highlight the asymmetry of media outrage.
Exactly. When FVD does something, it's a systemic crisis. When a mainstream party does something adjacent to FVD, it's ignored.
Her third example is hypothetical, but it is deeply poignant and gets right to the heart of the current political climate.
What's the third one?
She brings up the BBB, the Farmer Citizen Movement, which is another relatively new, highly successful populist party that has shaken up the establishment.
Yes, Farmers' Party.
She poses a scenario to the panel. Imagine if the BBB suddenly put a bunch of radical climate activists from Extinction Rebellion on their candidate lists, people who block highways and chain themselves to things.
Okay, I see where she's going.
She asks, wouldn't the media demand to know if the BBB was changing its core identity? Wouldn't the media demand those activists publicly renounce their past radicalism before allowing the BBB into a coalition?
She is trying to prove that the media treats left-wing radicalism as an eccentricity, but right-wing associations as a permanent moral stain.
Exactly. So how does the panel react to this barrage of counterexamples?
It's fascinating because they don't entirely dismiss them, but they refuse to be derailed. When De Vos brings up the SP member making the death threat, Renske, one of the interviewers, immediately concedes the point.
She admits it.
She says, yes, I find that a totally idiotic statement, and I have no problem saying you shouldn't say that. But, and this is the key to their strategy, they refuse to let the whataboutism change the subject.
They relentlessly steer the conversation back to the matter at hand.
Renske tells De Vos point blank, it's a shame you aren't answering my question. The panel's unwavering stance is that regardless of what happens in the SP, the CDA, or the BBB, there is something unique and deeply troubling about FVD's ecosystem.
They insist that FDD uniquely attracts people with extreme right pasts, and that is the specific puzzle they demand De Vos solve in that room, regardless of anyone else's hypocrisy.
It's a classic collision of narratives, and neither side is willing to blink.
De Vos wants to talk about systemic media hypocrisy, to invalidate the premise of their questions entirely. If the referee is corrupt, she argues, she shouldn't have to play the game.
Right.
The panel, however, wants to focus exclusively on the specific empirical evidence regarding FED candidates to hold them accountable.
And that profound disagreement over the rules of engagement brings us to perhaps the most complex, intellectually fraught, and deeply fascinating segment of the entire source text.
Yes.
The debate over how language itself is interpreted.
The dog whistle debate.
Yes, the dog whistle debate. This section of the transcript is absolutely wild because it shifts from political strategy to almost pure linguistics.
It gets very theoretical.
The interviewers actually play a video clip for De Vos right there in the studio. It features a journalist or commentator named Natasha Van Wezel discussing anti-Semitism within FVD.
And her argument in this clip isn't about candidates waving swastikas or quoting dictators.
Yeah.
Her argument is entirely about hidden, coded language. Van Wezel introduces the concept of dog whistles to the discussion.
For our listeners who might not be deep into political communication theory, could you explain what a dog whistle actually is in this context?
Sure. A dog whistle is a term or phrase that sounds entirely innocent, neutral, or policy-focused to the general public, but holds a highly specific, often controversial or prejudiced, hidden meaning for a targeted subgroup.
Like a literal dog whistle that only the dog can hear.
Exactly. It's a way of signaling to your base without alarming the mainstream.
Van Wezel gets very specific in the clip they play. She claims that when FVD politicians use terms like globalists or talk about reptiles or refer to powerful people with connections, they aren't actually talking about international trade agreements, the World Economic Forum, or conspiracy theories. She argues that these terms are actually secret synonyms, deliberately coded language for Jewish people. She says, and the text quotes her directly, "If you listen very carefully, you understand those dog whistles. And because of that, it's always very easy to say, oh, we didn't mean that at all."
She is accusing them of weaponizing plausible deniability.
It is a profound and incredibly difficult accusation to navigate.
Because it essentially claims that FVD's entire public policy platform, like their opposition to globalization or international institutions, is actually just a sophisticated smokescreen for deep-seated bigotry.
It removes the debate from the realm of what is actually said and places it in the highly subjective realm of what is secretly meant.
You can imagine Lidewij de Vos's reaction to this.
The text describes her as utterly incredulous. She calls the entire premise bizarre. She looks at the panel and essentially says, if you criticize globalization, if you critique international power structures, you are suddenly branded an anti-Semite.
What kind of Kafkaesque discussion have we ended up in?
Exactly. From her perspective, this dog whistle theory is an impossible trap. If she uses standard political vocabulary to critique the EU or international trade, her opponents will just magically decode it as bigotry, and she has absolutely no way to defend herself against a secret meaning she vehemently claims isn't there.
How do you prove you aren't sending a secret signal?
You really can't.
That is the brilliance and the danger of the dog whistle accusation. It reverses the burden of proof.
Right.
But this is where the panel dynamic becomes incredibly nuanced and, frankly, structurally brilliant from a debate standpoint.
What happens?
One of the interviewers, Bram, steps in, and he actually separates himself from Natasha Van Wezel's dog whistle theory.
He abandons the argument.
He realizes that arguing over the subjective hidden meaning of the word globalist is a messy debate that De Vos can easily win by claiming ignorance. He tells De Vos, I understand what she's saying, but I don't think it's the best example.
So he discards the weak argument of linguistic interpretation.
He essentially does. But then he drops the hammer. He pivots from the subjective to the concrete. He says, the problem isn't subtle code words. The problem is that I have seen app messages from 10 years ago that are evident, flat out, explicitly anti-Semitic.
Wow. He grounds the entire conflict instantly.
He takes away her defense of, you are misinterpreting my words.
Exactly. He moves the goalposts from linguistic theory back to undeniable evidence.
He says, I'm not talking about dog whistles. I don't care about the word globalist right now. I'm talking about things that are explicitly hateful in plain text.
This deepens the divide immensely. De Vos is trying to fight a philosophical war over the unfair interpretation of her party's public rhetoric and the policing of language.
While Bram is saying, no, we are judging you on the explicit, undeniable private texts of the people you have chosen to elevate to power.
It's two people arguing completely different realities. De Vos wants to debate the freedom to criticize globalism. Bram wants to debate why a man who sent an explicitly racist text 10 years ago is now second on her party list.
That profound disconnect, that inability to even agree on what the actual scandal is, brings us to the climax of this interview, the final standoff.
It really boils down to a brutal battle between strict principles and political pragmatism.
The panel expresses what I can only describe as a core political tragedy regarding FVD. And it's fascinating because they actually compliment the party here, which you rarely see in these hostile interviews.
True. The communications expert on the panel says he actually respects FVD. He says they have a unique ability in the Netherlands to change how people think about policy, not just the policies themselves.
They're successfully moving the Overton window, shifting what is acceptable to discuss in mainstream politics.
But he warns with real, palpable frustration by stubbornly refusing to clean house publicly, by refusing to just make these candidates apologize and pull the sting out of the media narrative. FVD is actively choosing to relegate themselves to the margins.
He says they will only ever play a role in the margins, shouting from the sidelines, never on the main stage where actual power is wielded and laws are written.
It is the ultimate political paradox for a populist movement. The panel is laying out the stark, unromantic reality of the Dutch parliamentary system.
It is a system built entirely on coalitions. You cannot govern alone.
If absolutely nobody will work with FVD because of this PR impasse, because of this refusal to apologize, then FVD will never enter a governing coalition.
And if they never enter government, they can never actually stop the asylum centers they rail against, they can never repeal the zero-emission zones, and they can never lower the taxes they are campaigning so hard against.
The panel is pleading with De Vos. Pragmatism dictates that you swallow your pride, apologize for the past, so you can actually achieve your policy goals in the future.
But De Vos is immovable.
She delivers this final, defiant stance that perfectly encapsulates her brand of populist politics. She looks at them and says, I am not in politics to make friends, I am in politics to change something.
She fundamentally rejects their premise that she needs the establishment's permission or their absolution to govern.
Her theory of change is entirely different from the panel's. She believes that if FVD just gets enough votes, if they tap into enough public anger and grow large enough, they won't need to beg for cooperation or play the apology game.
They will become such a massive electoral force that they can simply force the other parties to the table on their own terms.
She is betting everything on overwhelming size overriding the cordon sanitaire.
This raises an important question, perhaps the defining question of modern anti-establishment politics globally. What is the stronger, more effective position for a political leader today?
Is it to play the traditional game? To perform the rituals of public apology for the missteps of your party members in order to appease the media and the political establishment, hoping they will eventually deem you respectable enough to join their coalition and pass incremental reform?
Or is it to draw a hard, uncompromising line in the sand, to refuse to submit to what you view as hypocritical moral panic and demand to be judged solely on your current official party platform?
Banking on the idea that the voters will eventually reward your defiance with absolute power.
That is the exact tension this entire deep dive has been circling around. The source text shows a surging party and a deeply skeptical media establishment locked in a battle of wills, speaking entirely different languages, and neither side is willing to back down.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've explored the tension of a political movement trying to manage a surging populist present while being heavily anchored by a highly controversial past.
We've looked at the deeply divided views on crisis communication, the pull the sting, pragmatism pushed by the panel, versus the no surrender principle defended by De Vos.
And we've unpacked the intense subjective battle over media framing, double standards, and even the interpretation of political vocabulary itself with the dog whistle debate.
For anyone interested in how modern political narratives are constructed, contested, and weaponized, this source text truly serves as a masterclass.
It perfectly illustrates the clash of two opposing realities.
One side is focused on the pragmatic necessity of governance, the mechanics of public apologies, and maintaining a hygienic, morally unassailable candidate list to gain establishment acceptance.
The other side is focused on strict ideological principles, relentless policy focus, and an absolute unwavering refusal to bow to a system they believe is fundamentally biased and operating in bad faith against them.
It is a dynamic that is reshaping democracies all over the world, testing the limits of coalition systems and the power of the media.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
What's a final thought?
We've seen De Vos's strategy of total defiance. But let's play this out to its logical conclusion. If a political party completely isolates itself on principle, if they absolutely refuse to play the traditional media apology game and remain perpetually locked out of coalitions by a wall of establishment opposition,
do they eventually grow so large, fueled by voter frustration, that they rewrite the fundamental rules of political engagement entirely?
Or, by refusing to compromise and apologize, do they simply render themselves permanently obsolete, a loud but powerless voice in a system that ultimately requires partnership to survive?
It's a high-stakes gamble, and we are all watching the wheel spin.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.